Happy Friday, everyone. It is Penny and Kim, and we are here lighting up your Friday with the 5 stars of strengthening families. And we're going to be continuing our discussion on resilience. And for our check-in, we do want to ask how you guys did with the question that we asked, I guess your homework, which was, let me just check here, carving out some time, taking care of ourselves while taking care of others. So I know that I had said I was going to be, let's see, cutting some slack for myself. I think I managed to do that more often than I did the week previous, but still not perfect. But I'm going to cut myself some slack and say that's okay. That's okay, because stuff happens. So I think I'm doing pretty good in that area. How about you, Penny? How did you do?
Well, challenging. This is a challenging one for me because I'm, my inner critic is, pretty vocal. However, I feel like I did a pretty good job of finding the balance between excuses and grace. So sometimes it's easy for me to just be like, that whole idea I talked about last time, right? Like, this is me, take it or leave it. So trying to temper that a little bit with, yes, and these are choices I made in my life. Yeah. And I am responsible for the choices I make in my life, and I can be gentle with myself, and I still have to get over the demand resistance of, you're not the boss of me. But so most of the time.
So a work in progress.
Yeah.
Me too.
And when it's sunny and beautiful, that's quite a bit easier than when it's gray and snowy and cold. Yeah. So
yeah.
So today, as we promised last week, we're going to talk about when is it difficult for you to accept or give your child space to be who they are. So when do you have troubles with that, and why do you think that you have troubles with allowing them that space to be their own person? So I'm going to let Kim start us off with that.
Well, what comes to mind, first of all, would be when things are going tickety-boo, everything's great. And it's a non-issue. But when things sort of get a little bit stressed or there's emotions involved, then I have to really try to remind myself, I think as parents, we need to remind ourselves to kind of let go of that, because this isn't what we thought it was going to be. And there can be a lot of difficult emotions to have to deal with for ourselves when this isn't how we thought parenting was going to be, or this isn't how we thought our children were going to be. And and then we start to, because we have these ideas in our mind about what we want for our child, and it's out of extreme love that we want to mold them and don't even realize that's what we're doing. So when they step out of that, we, in our best efforts, we're doing it from a place of love, but we may not be allowing them space to be in that moment, if that makes sense. So it's I think a difficult thing to do, but an important thing to talk about, and an important thing to become aware of in our own lives. Where are we sort of putting our children into this mold to create this wonderful human being, when really they're well on their way to that anyways? And do we really need to be doing that molding? So yes, there needs to be teaching and learning and guiding, but there has to be that space where they can become their own person too. What are your thoughts, Penny, on that?
Well, I think that's a good point, that our expectations of what our children will be as opposed to what our children are can be difficult sometimes. Sometimes there's a little bit of a grieving process, particularly if you have a child, that has challenges in any areas, or even if they don't, I mean, everyone has challenges, but there's sometimes is a process that's like grief of letting go. I think that's kind of a little bit what I'm hearing you say, that idea of, you know, loving the child you have, as opposed to the one you thought you might have, or, and that there are blank slate when in fact they're a full slate from birth. And I think when I think about this, so when is it difficult to give your child space? And when I think about that in relation to resilience, I think about fear-based parenting.
Yeah.
So I think that for me is when it's the most difficult, is when I'm afraid and I'm triggered because I'm afraid. Like I'm parenting from fear. So whether that's fear of, you know, my son loves pink, you know, fear of society and the world and how they're going to view that, or fear that my daughter is a tomboy, or fear that if I let them be their fearless self on the playground, they'll get hurt, or fear that I won't be able to handle their sadness when their pet dies, you know, like you talked about the emotions, right? For me, I think when I pull that all together, that's kind of the common thread is when I parent from a place of fear. I would notice that this would be when I was really trying to control my children the most. And that's tricky. Takes a lot of awareness and all of your strategies to breathe and step back.
I agree, because oftentimes that fear sneaks in. We don't even realize it's there. And so when our child does something, we just have this knee-jerk reaction that oftentimes we don't even realize, okay, maybe I might have overreacted there a little bit, or, you know, but I think we need to then, it's almost in retrospect or taking a look back and realizing, that's why I reacted so strongly to that, you know. And it could be fear of if our child is, you know, easily moved to tears, or doesn't take teasing really well, or those kind of things. It makes me think of that too. We worry, oh, you know, they're not going to have any friends, they're going to be called a baby, you know, we've got to toughen them up, you know, we've got to. And so we have these knee-jerk reactions in our parenting that are coming from this place of fear. Like you said, I think you've hit the nail right on the head there, Penny, because I think and oftentimes it's not necessarily the case. It's something that we've just got this fear around. So it's a trigger of that's something in us that's not sitting right in us, not necessarily in them at all. So that really affects the way we respond, and often maybe even can't respond the way we want to, but because we're responding just from a place of reaction. We're reactive parenting.
So then, as far as parental resilience, you know, what small steps, like what could we invite ourselves to do to help ourselves, first of all, recognize when that's happening, and maybe support ourselves in our own emotional process of regulating. So if you think about the risk being that your children feel like who they are is not enough, which is extremely detrimental to their brain development and their social development and how their life gets shaped. Because you know what? Kids do fall off playground equipment. Kids do get bullied. It's a real thing. So how do you as a parent find that balance between showing your love and acceptance for who they are and managing your own fear around those very real things?
Yeah, I'm jotting down a few things as you're talking. They're coming to mind because I think you've raised some really important pieces, and that is, you know, if we don't even have to tell our kids often that they're not measuring up, they can sense that. They, you know, if we're saying, oh, you know, that wasn't good enough, do it this way, they could internalize that they're not good enough, or that nothing I could ever do will measure up to you, you know. So that it's not necessarily that we even have to say that, it's more by our actions, right? And some of that can come from our own perfectionism, or like you say, our own fears. So I think the piece that we need to start to realize is that if there's a pattern, I think that's one way that I notice, oh, you know what, every time that happens, I react this way, I overreact, or I have really strong emotions about that. Then that's where I think I need to do some self-reflection and think, what's going on there? And sometimes I can't do that myself. Sometimes I need somebody else to help me out with that, you know, so that's where it's good to ask, hey, have you ever had this happen? Or what do you do when? Those kind of things. And the other thing that really came to mind too while you were talking was allowing our children to make mistakes, because so often we try to save them from that. We don't want them to make the same mistakes we made, you know, and there it is right there. They can't learn from our mistakes. I remember telling my mom that as a teenager, I can't learn from your mistakes. I had no idea how right I actually was. I mean, there's part of it that I could learn from, you know, she knows, she's wise, I need to listen, but some things I just need to learn on my own too. So it's an important piece there as well.
Yeah, because that whole idea of your own resilience, showing your children about resilience. So when you can tamp down the fear and let them make mistakes, let them experience disappointment, you're building their resilience and your own all at the same time, because they need those.
Yes.
They have to have those opportunities to fail, to be able to know that they can get back up and try again.
That's right. And that's where the emotions come into play, because oftentimes we're afraid of their emotions. We're afraid of them having upset, them having sadness. We don't want that. We don't want sadness. We don't want them to be angry, those kind of things. And when they do, then we don't necessarily make space for that, because we worry that they're not going to be accepted in society. And so there's all kinds of things that are factoring in. But when we can I think the biggest piece is understanding emotions, our own emotions, and allowing them and being accepting of them. Then we can allow it and be accepting in others, including our children.
When I strip this down to the core for myself, and I'm really thinking, what it boils down to is, I don't believe that I can handle it if something happens to my child. So fear. So the fear of my own lack of resilience, or my own inability to deal with grief and loss. That's big. That's not something we can just say, hey, do this and you'll no longer parent from fear, right? We know as adults, we know what's out there, and it's hard to navigate that. So again,
sorry, Penny, I interrupted you. I'll let you finish your thought.
Reaching out for that support.
Yeah.
Like you just said, help a friend, you know, talk things through, talk about your fears, because when we open that up and we let it out, it eases a little bit. It eases a little bit, eases our load a little bit.
Yeah. And fears really are about the future. They're not what's happening in the moment, right? So it's sort of, for me, the way I move through that is I realize that we'll get through this. We'll figure it out. And I just let it go in that moment, because I just trust that we're going to figure it out. That one thing I know is we'll get through this together. That's one thing I know. It's certain. I believe it with my whole heart. And so when I'm really struggling, I just kind of let it go and land on that. We'll figure this out. And that helps take the pressure off. Mm-hmm. And the fear, let go of the fear. Easier said than done.
Yes, and most of the things we talk about in these cafes is ideas and thoughts, planting seeds, so that maybe that's not something you've ever thought about. And again, we challenge and invite you to sort of think that through. So, you know, why is that difficult? When is that difficult for me to accept that? And how can I do something for myself that might help with that, ease my burden around that, because it doesn't feel good to be afraid. Or, you know, you want to be able to welcome your child as they are, and really create that strong sense of self for them, which is that they have the freedom to be themselves and be loved by you. So it's kind of a little bit like next week, because next week we're going to talk about taking things personally. So there's some connections there between how we can let our tiny medium and medium humans, sized humans, be themselves and still be able to parent respectfully and peacefully. So, small step, Kim. What can we invite our viewers to do this week?
I think for me, it's allowing our children, young and old, like you say, small, medium, and tall, space to have their emotions, to have their upsets, and just rather than going to a place of fear, just reminding myself, we'll get through this, we'll figure it out.
So we're going to ask you, people out there, next big explosion or big fear-based activity, hold your own hand, breathe your way through it, give space for that little person to emerge, and try to cherish yourself and them through that difficult moment.
And forgive yourself when you don't.
That's right.
Have
If you
grace.
can't do it, all right. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you back here next week, Friday at 1, for our final session on resilience. Take care, everyone.